Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to the West Cliff Climb. I am here, Joshua Duffy, with my good friend, Dr. Paul Looney. It's been a bit. He's back in the show, back in the saddle, still has a full head of hair. It's the only thing I'm disappointed to see. Nothing's changed for him on that front. But nevertheless, he's here with us. Dr. Paul, how are you, brother?
I'm doing great, Joshua. So good to be with you again. I love our conversations and look forward to them.
And like everybody here in Texas, we're just dying to take out all of our winter clothes because we get to wear them 6 weeks a year. And so you and I both are set up. It doesn't matter if it becomes 70 degrees later today. You can't tear this sweater off of either one of us. This is it. We finally get to dress up for cold weather.
That's right. Yeah, it's a wonderful day when it turns cool in Texas.
So here we are today. Of course, we have a lot to talk about. We're going to have a lot to talk about in the future. And just so you know, it's a deep desire that we have mutually to take on what's going on in culture, to be both relevant and reverent in how we navigate those things, and to help people find resolve in Jesus and in Jesus alone. That's exactly how Jesus navigated a culture that was always trying to be polarizing, always trying to pull people in one camp or the other. Nothing has changed in 2,000 years. And so we want to be able to offer that in these discussions. And I thought today we would dive into what is sitting on your heart. What is the burden? What is the angst? What is that prompting you're feeling from the Holy Spirit that you would love to dive in today? Take us along for a ride. What do we got?
Well, I, like many people, am dealing with some suffering in my life, some loss, some adversity, some struggle. And I thought it would be really good to look at the surprising link between suffering and happiness and how adversity can actually bless us.
I love it. I love it. Okay. How adversity can bless us, how there can be anything happy, fulfilling on the other side of suffering. On the surface, I'm going, how's that possible? And I bet I'm far from the only one who would think that. So why don't you break it down, as I know you can? What on earth is the link? Here we go.
Well, it turns out that many people in our culture are very aware of the term post traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, because for many years we've known that stress can break you down. It can elevate your blood pressure, make you more prone to illness, stroke, heart attacks. And so stress has often been viewed as something negative or bad. It's actually true that stress can have some unexpected benefits. There's a wonderful TED talk by Kelly McGonigal entitled "How to Make Stress Your Friend," in which she points out that although for many years we've vilified stress, that stress is part of what strengthens us. The philosopher Nietzsche said, "Whatever doesn't kill me makes me stronger." And while that's not literally true, because obviously some things can hit you hard and leave you weaker, the research is very clear that the majority of people who undergo adversity, trial, suffering, struggle, are able to come out on the other side, not with PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, but with PTG, which stands for post traumatic growth. That adversity itself, while we would love to avoid it for ourselves and for those we love, it provides the stimulus for us to overcome, to grow, to transform. The Apostle Paul says, I think it's Romans 5, that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, which does not disappoint us. Turns out that people who are able to survive and grow through adversity develop a resilience, a strength, a sturdiness that leaves them less fraught with anxiety in the face of struggle or turmoil or trial. That we can actually cultivate an ability to face adversity in a positive way. It's what James, the brother of Jesus, refers to in James chapter 1 when he says, Count it joy, my brothers, when you meet various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And so there's this unexpected value in suffering. The psalmist in Psalm 23 says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." And so what we believe is that in any persecution or any trial, any trouble or attack, that God has in mind a provision of grace for us in the face of that adversity.
Wow. So post-traumatic growth. I guess here's my question. Is is that a natural outcome, or is that a particular heart set mindset that puts us on that trajectory? And if so, if I'm sitting here listening to you right now and I'm familiar with the traumatic part, maybe I'm living it out there if I'm listening to you.
Right.
What
Yeah.
what's the what is the necessary checklist for it to turn into post-traumatic growth? What do I need to be thinking about?
Sure. Well, all of us have an inborn desire to grow and to transform. And you see it in children who want to rise to the occasion, who want to learn new things, who want to overcome, to learn to ride a bike or count to 10. There is some of that is innate in us as made in the image of God. God himself is creative and generative. But in answer to your question, we need an unwavering sense that there is a force at work for good that is capable, that is bigger than the adversity we're facing and can use it to further a good purpose. It's what Paul refers to in Romans 8 when he says, we absolutely know that God is at work in everything for good if we love him and yield to his purpose or called according to his purpose. And so there's that deep belief in the
Yeah.
goodness of God that really does give us that ability to 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 lean in rather than pulling back, and that confidence really is not in our own ability as much as it is in God's ability to give us what we need. Now,
You
over
know,
time, oh, sorry, go ahead.
and I'm reminded of a video that Dr. Koji Makai put out, a good friend of ours, about deep roots, and his point being, if you water something too often, the roots never go deep. Matter of fact, you run the risk of killing the plant. But if you begin to water it sparingly, it forces the roots to go down deeper
Yeah.
for water.
It's exactly true that a certain amount of adversity really brings strength. Several years ago, they conducted some experimental conditions. I think it was out in Arizona where they had an environment. I think they were experimenting with what they could do in space in terms of growing plant life and whatever. And what they found was that trees in that environment would flourish, but after a certain point, they would topple because they were shielded from any wind. They didn't have that force that they had to stand up against, and therefore they were weaker. So we find that children who are completely shielded from adversity, while we as parents think that would be a wonderful thing, it is not the blessing that we would hope it to
Mm.
be.
Wow. Okay, so let me set it up this way. I go to a fatherhood series, okay? And it is in an affiliation with the Catholic Church. So as a Lutheran pastor, it's the one place I can go where no one would have any idea that I would be in the mix as a Lutheran pastor. Of course, Lutherans, if you guys don't know the history, we like broke up with the Catholics like 500 years ago. And then we have this unhealthy fascination. It's like the girlfriend you broke up with, but you still see like, oh, what's she up to on Facebook, right? So I show up, and no one cares who I am. I'm anonymous. Who cares? And so I just get to sit there and take in talks and input and learn kind of, how to be a better dad and hear it from a different angle. What they talked about was the idea of inoculation with your children. And what is inoculation? It's exposing a certain degree of maybe a virus or a thing to a person for the purpose of strengthening their body against it, not
Yes,
to overwhelm their system. So
yes.
my question to you is, now let's flip the script real quick. Now we're not talking about the person who's in the trauma, but now we're talking about a parent that wants to best equip their little one for the kind of path of the reality of life that's waiting for them, but they don't want them to get run over by the bus, but they want to inoculate them. What does this look like, parenting 101, to set them up down this trajectory of a post-traumatic gratitude growth type person? How can they do that?
That's a great question. It really, to me, Josh, depends a lot on trusting God with our children. Like Abraham, we have to put our children on the altar and trust that God will be the ultimate decider of what their life experience looks like. Certainly, we want to do our best to protect our children, especially when they're small. If you think about planting a lawn, when the blades of grass are first coming up, they desperately need protection from being trodden on. And when children are very small, we do well to protect them rigorously. But
Yeah.
as they mature, we need to let go and let God, as the old saying is, to
Yeah.
let Him orchestrate some of that. That when we live in fear and protect our children from any possibility of harm, bullying, abuse, suffering, again, we may be doing them a disservice, and we may be limiting their ability to see in us that our trust is not in ourselves. Our trust is in a loving God who can use whatever comes our way to benefit us.
Wow. So good. Well, then you just set up my next question. Okay. Which is, now when we look at what is the, of how you set yourself up for that kind of growth to get on the other side of that trauma. If let's just say, I'm going to assume you've had your occasional client that's in denial. So
Many.
what what does it look like if I had to have a checklist right now of what does it look like that I am not setting myself up for growth, that I'm in the middle of my mess and I'm on the wrong track? What could I be looking at right now to go, ooh, I need to rethink this?
Right. Well, I'm so glad you brought up denial, because it actually is one of the things that when you ask about what people need to overcome adversity, a willingness to face the facts, to lean into the reality of suffering is one of the things that ironically leads to resilience. Paul says in Romans 4, Abraham faced the fact that his body was as good as dead, and he trusted God. And so one of the features of resilience, or people who bounce back from adversity, is that they're not Pollyanna. They're
Mm.
not in denial. They're willing to say, yes, this world is dark and death is horrifying. Pain is something to be avoided if possible. Suffering stinks. We're not the kind of person who's like, oh, it's not that bad.
Right.
No, it's that bad.
Yeah.
And God is that good. He's that big. But so facing the fact, having a belief that there is meaning in suffering through a belief in an almighty and powerful God, and then a willingness to keep walking through the valleys, to keep trying, to keep pressing in, to knock and ask and seek in the face of adversity, to find a way to move forward. Necessity is the mother of invention, after all. And when we need strength, we find it when we look for it, when we turn to God and turn to other people. When
Wow.
we are going through struggles, we do need other people to give us a helping hand, to help us climb out of the pit, to hold us up when we're limping, and to feed us when we're hungry for nourishment, spiritually, emotionally, or physically. And so adversity, one of the keys to finding joy in adversity is being able to see that God forces us at times to be interdependent or dependent on one another when we mostly prefer to be independent and self-reliant.
Okay, so it's almost like you're setting me up while I'm trying to set you up. This is crazy. All right. The segue simply is that of community. I mean, I'm reminded of Job. Job's world is decimated. But what's the messaging he has from his friends? Well, certainly you did something wrong. right? Like almost like a curse God and die type thing. Like no one is in this man's corner at all. And it makes me think of how important community is in navigating this very topic and this issue. And a lot of us seem to have probably community that's on one end of the spectrum or the other, which is enablers, quite possibly. Maybe those that in fact maybe take on more of a judgmental standpoint. They're not actually pushing us towards conviction, which is heading in a new direction. And that's rooted in hope, rooted in the cross, but actually condemnation, which is hopeless, from the gates of hell. So what do we do here in evaluating our community when we're in the midst of trauma? What should we be looking for and looking from the people that are around us? And what are maybe some signs of, I need to cut ties with this because this person keeps me in this mess. And for some reason seems to like that I'm in this too. What's that? What's your feedback there?
The human tendency when there is suffering is to tell ourselves that like there must be a reason. Jesus talks about the tower falling on the people, and he goes, hey, they're no worse than you. Because it's tempting to think, well, the reason that bad thing happened is because they're bad people. They did something. It could have been avoided if only they had been more cautious or godly.
Yeah.
Because we don't like to think that adversity can strike us at any moment without any warning and without any control. We like to feel like, oh, well, that happened to that country because they don't have God. Or, we choose to have a story that distances us from other people. By the same token, we could have pity for someone, which also distances us, like, oh, poor thing, they're just so broken or so hard hit. But again, pity distances us. Pity and judgment both do the same thing. Compassion, by contrast, draws us near. And we want people who have compassion for us, but who don't give us a pass to be a victim or to remain in that broken, downtrodden state. That we want people who feel compassion and who are going to give us a hand up rather than a handout, that will help us to get back on our feet, to keep moving forward. And that was a hard thing for me to learn in counseling people, because so often I would feel in the face of suffering a need to either fix it or get away from it. And people who have not dealt with their own story or their own grief are going to generally be very uncomfortable when other people are suffering. They just don't know how to stay anchored in the conviction that in the face of the worst things, like Job, that God is still able to bring restoration. And without that conviction, we are going to distance ourselves from them by judgment or pity and putting them over there where they're different than I am.
Great thought. Great thought. And I guess something else to hit our listeners with, just this idea of forgiveness. If your trauma is directly connected to another individual, moreover, an individual that's alive and well right now, living their best life while you got the worst of who they were and you were a part of that carnage. I always found it so interesting that Jesus never tells people to reconcile with one another. Like, the person that abused you, go out and have, ice cream cones and become best friends. It's really intriguing to me that he doesn't tell us to do that, but he does tell us to forgive. And I always thought, in my younger years, I thought, what an interesting thing why do you want me to forgive this person? Until I slowly started to realize that actually he's looking out for my spiritual well-being, that to harbor and hang on to anger or resentment or bitterness towards another human being actually hinders the post-traumatic growth potential. I won't grow. I'll stay in the trauma forever. Do you have a thought on just how forgiveness plays a role if some of the trauma that we're talking about feels less circumstantial and feels more like what someone has done to us?
Ooh, I love that. Yeah. So Jesus, in my mind, makes a distinction between how we relate to someone we consider a brother and how we relate to someone who we see as an evil person.
Yeah.
And person strikes you on one cheek, turn the other cheek. When you're forced to go 1 mile, go another mile. By contrast, he says, when your brother sins against you, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him.
Yeah.
So Jesus on the cross models for all of us that we can go to God and pray for God to forgive those who sin against us. He says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. However, as you point out, he doesn't say to the people nailing him on the cross, I forgive you. He doesn't, because they're not there. They can't receive forgiveness because they haven't come to repentance. And while the cross buys forgiveness for every person on the planet,
Yeah.
it's only available for those who are hungry for it, for those who sense their need for it and their brokenness. And so forgiveness, as you point out, Jesus did not want to go to the grave harboring unforgiveness.
Yeah.
And he goes to God on behalf of those people. But again, that the distinction you're making between forgiveness and reconciliation, I think, is very valid. And if you go to your brother and your brother has no desire to repent, to confess, or to be restored, then eventually you have to let go
Yeah.
and treat them as you would someone who is not in that covenant relationship of unity.
Yeah. You know what is so intriguing to me, Paul? I mean, there's been scenarios, and I'm sure you've run into them as well, when someone has been on the receiving end of flat out abuse, neglect, horrific things. And I would hear Christians who would pressure this person to stay in otherwise abusive situations, citing, what God's will is for them. And I'm thinking, God's will was never for you to get choked in front of your kids
Yeah.
or to be abused in front of your kids. Like, this is, so it's interesting to me when we're talking, and I love the way that you're talking about it too, is that there is a distinction to be made about your mental health, your mental, emotional, spiritual, physical health, and being reconciled. And I think, I had someone who I dealt with not too long ago, and a scenario that they were dealing with was trauma as a result of someone, but they were no longer here. They had passed away. And it was interesting how they worked through it was through the cross, as it
Mhm.
was meant to be,
Yeah.
that all things made right on the other side of the grave, all things made right from here to eternity, and all those past hurts and pains. That's
Mhm.
why Jesus did what he did. And we
Mhm.
find restoration and meaning, and we can move forward to become that person that's a stronger version, and to see that growth happen.
Yeah. Great point. Yeah, it's one of those things that again, we have to cultivate that ability to bounce back, to be willing to face the discomfort of approaching difficult conversations, or understanding how to get the support we need to figure out how to address those wrongs in our immediate experience. And as Jesus says, sometimes we need to bring somebody else into the mix.
Yeah.
We need to take it to the church. But there is that fundamental belief that we have the ability, if we turn to God, to navigate any storm. And that's really what happens when you go through an adverse situation and you come out the other side, particularly if you're able, like Joseph, to see that the suffering of your life, that your story that has been fraught with pain and hardship, betrayal and disappointment, has positioned you to not only grow, to have that PTG, post traumatic growth, but to equip you to be a servant. Joseph said to his brothers, look, I'm not God. What you meant for evil, God meant for good, to the saving of many souls. God's intention for Joseph all along was to use his journey of suffering to position him in a powerful way to make a difference. And that's what he wants to do, I think, with all of our suffering.
And just to give a shout out to Hidden Manna real quick is, to me, I in my time around you, and I've had now several years and been blessed by the interactions and the discussions, uh, you're gonna die with a lot of my secrets. Um, and like, but just between you and Terry as well in the ministry of Hidden Manna, I mean, Uh, you can tell when people are serving others and it's rooted in not only humility in Christ, but it's been strengthened by their own challenges
Mm.
and adversity. And I mean, I think that ministry and your ministry is a testament to that, like how God uses hardships that people go through in a profound way to help others. And I think that's part of that PTG.
Amen. Well, you know, your vision for Westcliff, ironically, in some ways grew out of a time when you desperately needed to connect with God.
Yes.
We were legitimately suffering, and you went to the mountains, and met God near a little town called Westcliff. And that, again, that, you know, our connection certainly is forged by the suffering we both share as men who are trying to minister the gospel in a climate that's sometimes very adverse to the message. And so, yeah, I think you're right. Hidden Manna, Westcliff, um, there's a birth that comes on the other side of death, and that's that anastasis, the resurrection power, is what we lean into whenever we experience adversity and death.
I love that. And I want to remind folks if they didn't already know this, the interaction that we had that I will never forget as long as I live. Because yes, Westcliff is the name. It's because all the other URLs, God, Spirit, Rock, they're all taken, right? So I was like, might as well just name it after the place I went when I was losing my mind. But I remember talking with you before you sent me to Westcliff, Colorado. And I remember you asked me, when's the last time you spent time with God? And I'm ashamed, but it's also funny now. My response to you, if you recall, was, well, I've been married 10 years. So, and you were like, what's wrong with you? And and I guess what I want, where I tie that in with what happened. And so I went off to pray and fast at your home in Westcliff, and forever grateful for that. And I guess I want to also remind our listeners, that's a great point. I was in a really tough, low spot, and it took carving out time, intentional, purposeful time, like I would any other relationship that was important to me, for God to meet me there. And, the idea of Westcliff is God met me in Westcliff. What's your Westcliff? If you're out there listening to us, it doesn't mean you have to literally go to Westcliff, but we all have that spot where God will meet us. And I guess I also want to encourage our listeners, from going PTSD to PTG, is also carving out that space and that time intentionally and purposefully, as you had me do. And I was met by God in that. Got a whole new sense of direction. And so if you're out there, and part of the deception of the enemy, if it can't get you bad, it'll get you busy. And you just stay on this rat race, and one day rolls into another, and you're just as miserable today as you were yesterday. Well, have you cut any time and carved any intentional, purposeful time and navigated all the things in your calendar and your schedule and put them all off to the side to have an appointment with Christ in the same way you would someone who you really, really love and hang out with? So that we're not just treating Jesus like if you think about it, if you always just handled Jesus like you did a friend, so you only talk to him at about 10:30 at night, right before you doze off. You don't even finish the call. Thank you, Jesus. And you just go to sleep. That's what we do. Or if you only talk to your friend when you're angry, where are you? Well, who would want to hang out with that person? Like, they only call me when they're falling asleep, and they only call me whenever they're angry. I think if we set aside the time like you had me do, how many of us would be set free and find health and clarity of vision and clarity of purpose and direction if we set aside that time in the midst of our trauma?
I love it. Thank you.
So I will tell this, guys, just one quick little anecdote is, I live on a street. I got a daughter, 8 years old, such a precious heart. Oh, she has my heart. I love her dearly, deeply. But for whatever reason, there's some different people on the street that that are her age, that many times have left her high and dry. And, as her father, I wanted to get in the way and tell her, don't go down the street one more time, because they're not going to want to play with you. And you're going to come back, as I watched so many times, crying, as a father, like I'm wanting to go Rambo on my street because these kids won't play with her. And I know as a loving dad, that's not the right way. And nor if I helicopter it and keep it, I have to inoculate her and let her taste something, a little bit of what that's like, of how cruel the world can be without it crushing her. And what I have noticed is we've had some new people come on the street, and my daughter is unbelievably intentional and purposeful about pulling that person in. Why? Why? Because she knows what it feels like. And she only knows what it feels like because it was first painful. And so I get to see the example of what we're talking about in an 8-year-old.
Beautiful.
And I think a point that you've made before is like, when I think we're hitting it right now, is all ages can benefit from this. And I'm watching a sense of compassion well up in my 8-year-old child, a sense of awareness that's not just all about self.
Yeah.
And it's rooted in pain.
Yep.
It's not rooted in a good thing. It's rooted in a hard thing, but it's producing a good thing.
So good. That's such a beautiful example. And teaching your child, or letting your child teach you how to respond to suffering, is such a beautiful thing. And Jesus says a little child will lead them. And sometimes we do need to see that impulse in our children to go again, to try again, to show grace in the face of judgment and mercy in the face of rejection. And so, yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think it's such a beautiful example of what we're touching on today.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, wow, I think we hit this from just about every angle. I can tell you, as always, Paul, blessed by the conversation. We have again flown through a half hour plus so fast, it's scary. So I would love it if you would close us out with a word
Love
of
to
prayer.
do that. God, you are good. And as the Apostle Paul tells us, we know you are at work. You're at work in everything to bring about good when we love you and are called according to your purpose. That next verse, Paul says, that those you foreknew, you predestined to be conformed to the image of your dear Son. So we pray that in all things, in blessing and in hardship, that we would be conformed to the image of your dear Son, Jesus. In his name we ask it. Amen.
Amen. Well, love you all. Love you, brother. Tune in next week. We got some more great topics to talk about. We hope to check in with you all. Don't hesitate to reach out to us and hit us with your questions. We'd love to keep this going. We love you all. Later.
Love you. Bye.